Hey guys, my guest tonight, John Kachuba, is going to be on hand to talk about vampires and other shapeshifters. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How is everybody today? I think I heard you all say good. It's resounding. Awesome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state of California, and that means that we can get to you. By getting to you, I mean I've got somebody almost in every, well, not every county in California, but you know, if we're not in the county near you, we're 2 or 3 counties away, so we can get to you. That's what I mean by that. And we're here to help. We're definitely here to help. We are a full-service paranormal team, meaning we have psychics on our team, as well as people that can do cleansings and shamans and things like that. And we also have, I don't like to call them debunkers, but the brains of the team. I call them the brains, the brain consortium. Those are the guys that come in and look at your wiring and look at whatever natural things they think might be causing your issues. So we look at all that. Because if you don't get a group that does that, it's a disservice. It really is. Anyhow, you can find us here on Facebook. You can find us over at TikTok. You can find me at Instagram. And those addresses are, I am Ghosty Girl at Instagram. We are California Haunts, all lowercase, on TikTok. We're also Cal Haunts on Twitter. And we're California Haunts on Facebook. We have several pages there, as well as my own personal page. So you can get a hold of us there. We're easy to get a hold of. And if you Google us, you might even find my phone number out there somewhere. I do get phone calls occasionally. Anyway, I want to welcome everybody tonight. We've got a great guest. He's been with us before. And it being Halloween and all, now's the time when we talk about creepy things. And a lot of those things involve vampires. So maybe he can talk to us a little bit about vampires. That's why I thought talking about shapeshifters tonight would be kind of cool. Because there are a lot of different types of shapeshifters, not only vampires, but shapeshifters. But he's been with us before, and I'll let him tell you about himself. His name is Kachuba. So let me bring him in. Oh yeah, see, I keep forgetting that too. If you're watching from Facebook and you like the show, be sure to follow. If you're watching from YouTube, be sure to click on that little ghost with the magnifying glass and the Sherlock Holmes hat on. That will subscribe you to our more than 450 videos. And there's different topics on there. So I think there's something for everybody. Okay, now I'm going to bring it in. Good evening, sir.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
How have you been?
I've been good. Enjoying beautiful fall weather here in Ohio. So yeah, doing great.
Fantastic. What's new with you?
Well, actually, funny you should ask. I know you wanted to talk about shapeshifters, and that,
whatever you have to talk about, I'm an open book. You know me.
Yeah. Well, I like open books. That's what I write, open books. So
Yeah, see.
But Shapeshifters was my latest book that came out in 2019, and it's still doing pretty well. I'm still talking a lot about that. But I actually have a new book that's coming out next year. So you're one of the first people to actually hear about it. So,
okay.
And what's really interesting for me is that it's a book for kids. It's still a paranormal book, but it's based for like middle grade kids from maybe 10 to 13 years old, something like those lines. But I've always wanted to write a book for kids. So it's the first one in a series, and it's called Haycorn Smith. That's the character's name. Haycorn Smith and the Castle Ghost. And what I'm doing in this series, this is the first and what I hope will be a series, is that the locations that I use are actual haunted locations that people can actually, really go to and check out for themselves. So it's not just fiction, it's fiction based on reality. So this one takes place in Loveland, Ohio, which is not too far from Cincinnati, where I live. And I lived in Loveland for a while. And Loveland it's a small town, but it has a unique sort of history about it, in that there's a castle in Loveland. It's called Chateau La Roche, sometimes called Loveland Castle, that was single-handedly built by one man, Harry Andrews. It's on the edge of a river, and he literally dragged rocks out of the river, and then started also making his own bricks out of using the old style wax milk cartons and using them as molds to make bricks. So anyway, he built this fantastic Norman castle. It's like 1/4 scale, and he lived there all his life, and he worked on it till the day he died. And it's haunted. It's haunted by Harry himself, Harry Andrews, the builder. But even when Harry was building it, he talked about seeing ghosts in the area on the riverbank and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a nice haunted history, and that's where the book is set. And I don't want to give the whole story away, obviously, but it'll be a lot of fun, I think, just for kids to read that. And like I said, they can go to the place and check it out. It's open to the public.
I was going to say, I've heard of that place.
You may have. I mean, it's gotten a lot of press over the years. I'm trying to think when Harry passed away. He lived in the castle, and he worked on it literally till the day he died. And when he was probably well into his 70s, maybe even later, maybe even older. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But actually, he died in a sort of a tragic accident. He was actually working on the castle, and he was working with hot pitch, like on the roof, tarring some of the roof or whatever. And it actually somehow caught fire to his pants, and he burned. It was a terrible accident. But up until that day, he was working there, and so he had worked on that castle. I think he probably started it back in the maybe 1970s or so for a long time. And it's people from all around the world had visited, and he got a lot of press. So yeah, I'm sure you would have heard about it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it sounds like a great book. I'll have to look out for it.
Oh yeah, well, believe me, you'll know about it when it comes out. Actually, I have a new Facebook page. I have my own Facebook page, John Kachuba, okay. But now I have one, John B. Kachuba, author, and I'm putting all my sort of book posts up there. So I'm already starting to put some stuff up about Loveland Castle, including a link to their website, which is lovelandcastle.com. And they have some videos. It's a cool place. I visited there many times when I lived there, and it's just, people get married there. It's a wedding venue and everything else, but it's just really very awesome.
How cool. See, my dad grew up in Ohio.
Is that right? Whereabouts?
Cleveland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
So
well, it's the other corner of the state.
Yeah, I've been back to Ohio several times.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yep. Well,
now especially, I loved the fireflies in the summer.
Oh yeah,
chasing fireflies. Yeah. Oh my gosh!
Yeah, right in my backyard, I watch the fireflies.
Yeah, we don't get those out here. I have fake ones.
You don't really?
Yeah, we don't get them out here.
Oh, okay.
I had to buy fake ones, but I still get them. I put them in anyway.
Okay.
So we're being Halloween like it is. There have been some famous shapeshifters over the centuries. And one being like Dracula being the vampire. What makes vampires so scary?
Why are they so scary?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think because one reason might be is they're not your typical sort of monster that you can readily identify, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the movies and you see a werewolf, I mean, a werewolf when you see one. Mm-hmm. Some kind of an alien from the space planet or something, outer space or whatever. But there's certain monster types. You know what a ghost looks like. But vampires, are sort of insidious. I mean, you don't really know what a vampire is until maybe, he shows you his fangs, right? Or drinks a pint of your blood. But I think that sort of dual nature, that shape-shifting nature where they're like us for practical purposes, until they turn, so to speak. I think that's what makes them kind of scary characters and makes them so popular in movies and novels and, things like that.
I just find it interesting because, the legends go way, 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 way back on this, from like, all those years back. Even the graves, people find these graves where they had even put a stake through somebody's heart, or they put the metal up on some of those graves to keep whatever, had to be in there.
Right.
It's still going on today in some places.
Yeah, they found them with, literally metal cages underground, over the coffin and everything else. But, and the thing is, when we think of vampires here in America, we think of Bela Lugosi,
Right.
the movie, and all the Dracula people after him.
Right.
What was the Christopher? I can't think of the guy's name. Anyway, escapes me now. But all these famous actors that have played vampires, or we think of
Twilight.
Bram Stoker's book Dracula. Who's that?
Twilight.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. I mean, yeah, we have this sort of idea what a vampire looks like and what it is.
Right.
But what I found in my research when I was writing Shapeshifters is that there are vampire creatures, and I'll say creatures because they're not necessarily always sort of human, in almost so many cultures around the world, and so they have a different take on them sometimes than what they look like and everything else. But the basic premise is still there's sort of the I don't want to say the living dead. We think of zombies kind of when you talk like that,
Right.
but they essentially prey on human beings, and if they don't actually take their blood, as they do in a lot of the Western movies and books here in
Right.
the Western world, they will at least take your life force. They'll somehow drain your vitality, drain you away, and eventually you'll die or become one of them. And that's a pretty common motif in cultures all around the world that have some kind of a vampire animal or person or being.
Well, when you talk about that, the vampire being, I mean, the first vampire that was ever on film did not look like Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee or the Twilight vampires. It was
Yeah.
Nosferatu.
Yeah, right. And I'll tell you, if people in your audience have not seen Nosferatu, they've got to see it. And it's on the internet. You can just put in Nosferatu and you can see it. It's an awesome movie. I mean, it's fantastic. And you're right. And you mentioned Twilight before.
Right.
And if you compare Count Orloff in Nosferatu with like some of the characters from Twilight, worlds apart, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Twilight vampires are all, they're gorgeous, they're sexy, they're rich, they're educated, they're very
yeah.
sophisticated, they lavish dinner parties and they drive hot cars and, whatever. That's not Count Orloff at all. I mean, he's creepy, he's a creepy looking dude. But
now, for people that don't know where the legend of Dracula came from, could you give them some background on that? Because, I mean, Dracula was a real person.
Yeah, right. So when I was doing Shapeshifters, I did a lot of research abroad. I was in France, Portugal. I was in Belarus, of all places, in Ukraine. I mean, two places that are in tough shape right now, especially Ukraine. But I was also in Romania. And when we think of vampires here, again, in Western culture, it really begins for the most part in terms of popularity with Bram Stoker, with his novel, Dracula. I mean, certainly there are vampire legends and stories long before that. That's where he got most of his, but they weren't that popular until Stoker's novel. And suddenly everybody's, listening about vampires. Stoker, it's believed that Stoker based his Count Dracula on a Romanian prince, the 16th century, named Vlad. And the last name depends on who you talk to, but it could be Vlad Tepes or Vlad Dracul, Dracul, which people say can be translated as devil or dragon. But this guy, he was a medieval prince in Wallachia, which is a province of Romania, and he was pretty brutal. He was known for, they called him Vlad the Impaler, because he was known for impaling his enemies, whether they're foreign soldiers or people who are conspiring against him or whatever, political people. But he would impale them on a post, just, right up there. And horrible. There's a story that the Turks were invading that, I don't know, it really wasn't Romania in those days. We'll just say Wallachia, which was his province. But the Turks were invading, and so to keep them out, he had captured a previous Turkish army or something, and he impaled all these soldiers, something like 10,000, and he literally had them lining the highway, the road, that the new Turkish invading army was going to take. And apparently, when they got up there and they saw all their fellow soldiers impaled on these posts, all the whole length, they just turned around and said, let's rethink this invasion. Maybe we don't want to do this after all. So he was ruthless in that regard, bloodthirsty. But I really think, for all practical purposes, he probably wasn't much different than a lot of medieval rulers of his time. I mean, they were all pretty ruthless. That they fought each other constantly, and they did it brutally. But legends grew up about him because he was so horrible, I guess. Legends grew up about him that perhaps he was a vampire. And so it's hard to tell where Stoker never went to Romania. Right. So even the locations he has, like the castle that Dracula lives in the novel, looks like it was modeled on a castle in Bran, Romania, called Bran Castle. And he was never there. He saw photos of it, and all that, but he was never in Romania. But so people think that a lot of his information for the Dracula vampire, Count Dracula, is sort of based, loosely with a lot of literary embellishment, I guess, on Vlad Tepes.
Right.
So when I was in Romania, I went to the house where Vlad was born. I can't even think. The town is Sighisoara, and the house is there where he was born. It's now a restaurant, so you can go in there and eat in the house that he was born in, which I did. I also went to the ruins of one of his castles in Targoviste, and there's a tower that's still left. And it was said that from that tower, Vlad would look down on the executions. He'd climb up there and he'd watch the executions in the plaza below the tower. And I also went to the place where he was reportedly buried. And it's a little tiny monastery on an island that is probably not much more than maybe 2 acres. And it's in the middle of this lake in the town called Snagov in Romania. And there's a causeway. You can walk out to the island and you can go into this little chapel. So I did. And his tomb it's not even a tomb. It's just literally a grave in the ground. It's a flat stone laying in the ground. And it's right at the altar of this chapel. And supposedly he's buried there. But the interesting thing was that back in the 1930s, I think it was, there were some archaeologists that opened the grave to see if he was there or anything else. And they opened the grave and it was empty. There wasn't anything in there. So that too brings out the legend, like, well, if he was a vampire, he's not going to be there. He's still wandering around someplace, So nobody knows for sure. They don't even know how Vlad died. It was said that he was killed by some of his own men, killed by soldiers in battle, but nobody knows, and nobody knows for sure. At one point, something was buried in that chapel, and people said it was Vlad, but he's not there now.
Oh, he's not.
We don't know where he is. He might be in the studio right now.
You never know. He's standing over my shoulder. I don't know.
Hey, he could be.
Maybe my dad was Hungarian. We'll just go with that, I remember 8 years old being over in Hungary. Yeah, the Romanian border wasn't that far away from where we were staying.
That's right.
And my sister and my brother-in-law, I grew up on watching creature features as a kid,
Yeah, sure.
All those movies. And my father would sit there and he would go, we're only 10 miles away from Dracula's castle.
Yeah. Right.
And I knew I was aware enough to know, hey, yeah, we're in a foreign country, and I freaked out.
Right.
And that's how that stuff follows you as you grow up.
Yeah.
So
all those sites now are, it's Transylvania, which is part of Romania. But the interesting thing is that, you say you're Hungarian descent. There are a lot of Hungarians in Romania and in Transylvania, and they still speak Hungarian. They pretty much live in their own villages. And there's kind of this kind of a split between native Romanians and Hungarians in Romania. There's there's some hard feelings between them, mainly because at one point that was part of Hungary, and Romania took it. And so there's some prejudice now and everything, and it's not good. We the church that I go to here in Cincinnati has a partner church in Transylvania, and in a small village, and the people there are all Hungarian. And there's not a lot of love lost for the Romanian government, and vice versa. There's some discrimination against Hungarians, pretty much. But the interesting thing is, because of that, depending on who you talk to, if you talk to native Romanians, most of them will talk about Vlad, Prince Vlad, not as a monster, but as a national hero, because he did defeat so many other armies that were trying to invade that region over the years, Turks, Mongols, whatever. He defeated them all. So he's like a national hero. But if you talk to the Hungarians who are in Romania, he wasn't, because he didn't treat them very well. So they consider him, not a nice guy. Right? I don't know if they say he's a vampire, but they don't, they're not fond of him at all.
Right. The other thing too, what people don't realize is Bela Lugosi was Hungarian.
Right.
And he spoke very little English.
Right.
And if you look at because you've been over there, so obviously you've seen the difference in languages. If you look at the different things in the Dracula movies, it's all in Hungarian. All the stores, all the signs are in Hungarian.
I'll have to look at some of the old ones. I can't say that I paid attention to that.
Yeah, I didn't even notice until I was much older watching the movies. But I went,
that's interesting.
So
I'll have to check that. Yeah,
because he spoke very little English.
Bela Lugosi was buried in his full Dracula outfit when he died. Did you know that? The cape, the medal, the medallion, the sash, the whole bit.
What I find interesting is how these legends, with very little communication, way back then, how these legends would spread, or how communities had their own version of these legends. Like you'd have the vampire legends, we'll just say Transylvania, but then you could go to Peru and they have their own legends of these things.
Yeah, right. That's what I mean. All these different cultures have different stories, and that's something that I found to be universal when I was doing research for the Shapeshifters book, in the sense that almost every culture had some kind of a shapeshifter character, whether it was a vampire or something else. But that was kind of a universal figure, almost everywhere, and it goes way back. I have in my book, I have a drawing, a photo of a drawing of a cave painting in France that goes back to the Neolithic times. So we're talking about, prehistory, right? And the drawing looks like a deer man. It's like a guy, it's like an animal standing on its hind legs with its arms up. But instead of having hooves like a deer, it clearly has fingers and toes. It's got antlers, yet the eyes are forward like ours instead of being on the side of the head like deer. So what a lot of anthropologists believe is that this is a drawing of a shaman transforming himself into a deer. Not whether he did or not, but they believe they did. Right. And so it goes back that far, before written history. So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, you don't know how these things spread, but it's interesting that every culture has something like that.
Well, look at the Native Americans. They have legends of that.
Sure.
There's paintings of that, and there's illustrations of that.
Right. In the Southwest, they have the Skinwalker, which is considered a shapeshifter. The Wendigo up in sort of the central, actually northern central kind of Midwest area and up into Canada. People consider that to be a shapeshifter. Even the legend, Coyote is a trickster, right? Almost every tribe in America recognizes that. But he's also a shapeshifter. So it's it's just incredible how widespread it was. That really floored me, to be honest, because I didn't know what to expect when I was doing this book. And when I think of as they say, different countries and different cultures, if you look at the sheer number of shapeshifters in terms of different types, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of shapeshifters.
Hmm. Do you think there's something to it? I mean, because there's all these stories, and I mean, you think it's just people, telling campfire stories, or do you think they're back in the days, or even now, these things might exist?
Well, I don't think that people can, physically transform into another animal or another person
Hmm.
or even into some inanimate object like some shapeshifters can do.
Sure.
But I do think, and in my book I talk about I talk about external and internal shapeshifters.
Hmm.
When I talk about external, I mean the typical, like a werewolf,
Sure.
where suddenly instead of being like you grow this and you grow it all over,
Right.
and they get fangs and they get claws, and you can see that change. That's external. But internal shapeshifters, I think, are shapeshifters that have more a mental shift than anything else. They don't change physically, but they may believe that they have transformed into something else. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's a disease state.
Hmm.
There's lycanthropy, where people actually believe that they've changed into wolves,
Right.
and they haven't, but they will act out like wolves. They'll run around on all fours. They'll growl at people. They'll snap. They'll think they'll tear at their own flesh. I mean, they think they have been turned into wolves, and they haven't been.
Hmm.
But then there's just other people, I think, who just have that sort of ability to believe that they've transformed. Think of shamans, like in indigenous peoples today.
Right.
In the book, I talk about, among others, I talk about some of the Bushmen, the Kalahari in Africa, the Bushmen,
Hmm.
and I have some accounts there, some interviews. I didn't take the interviews, but some other people had them, and I recorded them, where these guys would say that, I have transformed into a lion or a cheetah or a tiger or whatever it might be, and yet people around them won't see that. They don't
Hmm.
see the guy suddenly grow hair and claws and fur,
Right. Right.
But he'll act out, and he'll even say, "I can feel the tiger in me. I can feel the lion in me." This kind of stuff.
Hmm. I was just thinking as you were saying that too, when you talk about disease. There's countries where, and this happened with, and I hate to bring it up, but the circus sideshows, and they actually had the what they call him, the wolf boy. That was he was called, or the lion boy?
Yeah,
But they
yeah,
had some kind of disease
right,
that made them grow facial hair and all that kind of hair. So I
right.
mean, it could stem from stuff like that as well. Where people were
Well,
afraid of it.
yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think some of the early stories about werewolves or other kind of shapeshifters
Hmm.
stems from some of that kind of stuff. Disease state that people didn't already understand what it was about.
Hmm. Hmm.
So they see this poor kid or adult or whatever covered with hair, they think, okay, something, he's got to be a wolf. Well, no. And obviously some people would have suffered consequences
Hmm.
of a disease. People, other people reacting to them poorly, thinking that they're possessed or something else like that. And so,
Well, yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
I think, yeah, I
Go
think
ahead.
it's
No,
true.
yeah, I
Uh,
agree. I mean, look at the Salem witch trials. I mean, that's a perfect example of hysteria going, of hysteria because I mean, if the woman was just slightly different, did different things, work with herbs or whatever, she was a witch.
right. Well, in my book, I have a great example of vampire hysteria, and it occurred right here in America. And it was like the late 1890s with Mercy Brown, who lived in Exeter, Rhode Island. And Mercy was a 19-year-old girl. Her mother had some kind of a wasting away illness and died. Her sister had the same kind of disease and died. Her brother became very ill. And after seeing his mother and sister pass away, the local doctors said, you need to go out west, get the fresh air in the mountains. That'll cure you. So he went out to Colorado. This is like 1890 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And so Mercy Brown was still back at home. Um, Her brother didn't get much better at all. In fact, he didn't get better. So after maybe a year or so in Colorado, he decided, well, I'm going to go back to Rhode Island. So he goes back to Rhode Island, and he dies. And so, well, sorry, he doesn't die. He's sick. But Mercy, his only surviving sibling, who's now 19 years old, she gets sick and she dies.
Mm-hmm.
So for some reason, and it's still unclear to me how this happens, but people thought, well, boy, her mother died, her sister died, her brother is dying. It was all from this wasting away disease, and Mercy did too. Somehow they came to the conclusion that Mercy was a vampire and that she had caused her mother's death, her sister's death, and that now she was killing her brother, even though she was dead in her grave. So the authorities, this is amazing because it was actually written up in the Providence Journal, which is the local newspaper. It's still the same newspaper up there, and this is all a true story. The authorities dug up her grave, and they cut out her heart, and they burned it. They burned it down to ashes, and they mixed the ashes in some kind of a medicinal potion, and they gave that to the brother, thinking this is going to cure you. Well, it didn't. But this created this hysteria that, oh my God, there's vampires among us. Now, what the family members died from was tuberculosis, which is a very, very slow wasting. They called it consumption in those days. But you literally would just waste away. You get thinner and thinner, and you just, no energy, everything. You just really fade out, which was the way it was with vampires. Mm-hmm. So people were starting to think it was the vampires, and all around New England, next thing you know, people are getting sick, and so they're desecrating cemeteries, digging up corpses, thinking this is a vampire, and putting stakes through them, the whole bit. Finally, I don't even know how it ended, but finally cooler heads prevailed, and they realized that they were all off in a little bit of a delirious rage here. So other family members started, when somebody died, they'd pour 25 yards of concrete over the grave and everything so that nobody could dig it up. And it was just crazy. And this was, Mercy died in 1892, I think. That's not really all that long ago, and that's in America, where we like to think that, yeah, we're so enlightened and so intelligent and, whatever. Not necessarily.
Wow. Let's talk about skinwalkers a little bit, because there's still sightings of these things. Trucker will be driving down the road, late at night, and he'll look over, and there's what they think is a skinwalker. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly been a lot of sightings, and most of the time it's in the Southwest. Arizona, Utah, Nevada, that area primarily is where you see it. And most of the native nations that are out there, like the Utes, the Navajo, the Dene, as they call themselves, don't like to talk about shapeshifters because they believe that they're real, and they don't want to be, bringing anything down on them. So they don't even want to talk about it. Like, now, if I don't talk about it, then nothing will happen to me. But if I do, if I mention it, they'll come after me. So they have that kind of a belief. But yet there are, like you say, there's truckers or people just driving out on these long desert highways in the middle of the night, total darkness, nothing but stars. And all of a sudden they'll see something, usually canine, some kind of a wolf or something, just loping along beside the truck. And the truck might be doing like 80 miles an hour, and so's that wolf. And people have had experiences saying that they've seen these things, sometimes like try to attack a car or something, or some people have even said they've seen it close enough that they think it's not a canine, that it looks strangely off somehow, like human in some ways. Mm-hmm. So what the native people believe is that the shapeshifter is basically, what the Dene would call a bruja, a witch, with the ability to change into this thing. And what it does is its whole reason to be is malice. I mean, it's an evil creature, and usually it's done. It transforms to enact vengeance on somebody or something like that. So it's not a nice creature. But like I say, it's hard to get a lot of real stories about it because most of the people that experience it or think they have, they don't want to talk about it. But it's a figure that's been around for a long time in those cultures. So.
What is the difference between a skinwalker and a Wendigo?
Well, a Wendigo, a lot of it depends. It depends on what nation you're talking about. Like the Cree have one way of looking at it, and some of the other nations have different ways of looking at it. But essentially, they think that a Wendigo is formerly a human being that's been cursed, and frequently it's been cursed because it's a suicide. It's somebody that has killed themselves, and that's just like in some religions, suicide is a horrible thing, and you burn in hell and all that kind of stuff. Some Native people feel sort of the same way, that if you're a suicide, that's an evil thing to do, and so you turn into this thing. Most Wendigos have this. They're not only shapeshifters, but a lot of them are cannibals. And they have this insatiable appetite where they're always hungry. They're always hungry. And so a lot of the depictions of a Wendigo is this horribly emaciated kind of creature, but horrible and a killer. So, like I say, it depends on who you're talking to, because there's a lot of different stories about them and different variations on what they are and what they do and all that kind of stuff.
I just find it interesting, all these legends. And in your research and looking into this stuff all over the world, which shapeshifter stands out the most to you?
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm sort of a traditionalist. I kind of like the werewolf.
Okay.
And I think what I like about that is that I think part of why we have a werewolf, if you want to call it that, having one, is because, mankind's relations with animals goes back a long time, right? But what's the very first animal that humanity is able to domesticate and has been with us forever is the dog, right? It's a canine. And a wolf obviously is not 100% dog, but it's canine. And our modern dog does come from whatever wolves are genetically. And so I think there's some almost, I don't want to say mystical or magical, but I think there's some real connections sort of between canines and humans. And I think that's maybe what makes the werewolf so interesting. We have animal nature and a human nature, right? Every human being is, whether we like it or not, we have an animal nature and we have animal instinct. Usually our higher reason and everything else overrides that, but not always. And so I kind of think that if we had our choice, if we can voluntarily change into something, that a lot of us would become a dog, become a werewolf. I got a dog. She has a great life. I wouldn't mind changing my life with her,
That's funny. That's funny. When you think about these legends, and there's the other thing too, is you have your Native American legends. I hate when it does that. Updates. You have your Native American legends, and those rub off onto other folks as well. That's what I find so interesting about this. Like when we talk about the Skinwalker, these other people are seeing them. So I just find it interesting, like we talked about earlier, how that stuff gets passed along.
Right. Yeah, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if many of the people that talk about having a Skinwalker experience are not Native, because, like I said, a lot of them don't want to talk about that. So, and you mentioned like, a trucker or something going down the highway. It's yeah, sure. Yeah, and stories spread. I mean, they certainly do spread, right? Not just among, neighbors and whatever, but from culture to culture. And I do find in my research there were some similarities, not just the fact that everybody has a shapeshifter, but there are some actual similarities between something in France and something in Romania or something. So, stories certainly travel.
Yeah. When you think about the werewolf and the skinwalker, I mean, there's similarities there because the werewolf was a man that turned into this wolf, and the skinwalker tends to be look kind of human in a weird sort of way.
Yeah, and I think when they talk about the transformation of a skinwalker, I think more often than not you hear it being transformed into a canine, like
Right.
a coyote or a wolf or something like that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hear about I call those the big four. The vampires, werewolves, skinwalkers, Wendigos. What other ones are out there that maybe nobody's heard about?
Well, there's all kinds of names for them. I mean, you're right in the sense that there's a lot of vampiric type of
Right.
creatures. They may not be called vampires. I mean, in Africa or something, they have a different word for them, but it's the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's frequently like a shaman or a wizard or whatever, medicine man, whatever they might call it, that has that ability, or people say has that ability to change into something. And frequently it is, well, like in Africa, for instance, it's not uncommon for vampires to be in the form of a bat because they got some big bats, not like we have. They've got some major bats in Africa, and so it's not uncommon. But there's all kinds of things like Japan. When I started doing some research on Japan, I was blown away. I had done a lot of research on Japanese ghosts because, as you know, I've written 5 books about ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how all this stuff, paranormal stuff, started there. And the Japanese have a fantastic ghost culture because, unlike us, we say, okay, a ghost is a spirit of somebody that passed away,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hanging around for whatever reason. And most of the time it's not evil, but yeah, maybe it could be bad. But the Japanese have ghosts that uh, when the ghosts come back, they can be, some of them can be shapeshifters. So they have ghosts that actually shapeshift. So we don't have that in our culture. A ghost is a ghost, right? In
Right.
their culture, you have a ghost that can there when it can can be a ghost, and then it could change. It could shapeshift into, if it's a female ghost, it can change into another woman, or it can change into a guy. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
And frequently, what you hear in Japanese ghost stories is a lot of stories about revenge. Frequently, it's like a jilted lover or an affair or something, and somebody gets killed, and so the ghosts come back to seek vengeance. And so when they do that, they come back and they'll shapeshift into a different person to hide what they're about. But so I found that in the ghost culture, and then I just realized that the Japanese have a ton of shapeshifters that aren't necessarily ghosts, but just shapeshifters. They have something called I can remember, a kitsune, which is sort of like a fox, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a fox. In fact, a lot of them have 7 tails, 7-tailed foxes. Okay, if you say so. But the kitsune is one that is a fox, and in a lot of ways, I think of that as sort of like our Native American coyote, kind of shapeshifter, trickster kind of figure. So they have that in their legends, and he can transform into anything. There's something called a kitsune, and I might get the name wrong without looking at it, but Tanaka or Tanuki, I'm not sure. And this is actually, it looks sort of like a raccoon, but kind of like a dog and a raccoon. It's got kind of a bushy ring tail like a raccoon. That's an actual animal in Japan. It's a real animal, but they also believe that this animal is capable of being a shapeshifter and can shapeshift into anything else. There's something called a kappa, which looks like a demented Kermit the Frog is what it looks like. It's an aquatic creature, and it looks kind of frog-like, but its head has a depression in the head, and in that depression, there's always water laying in there. It's like a little, so he has like a little bowl on top of his, built into his head, and it's got water all the time. And as long as the kappa has water in there, he's okay. If the water is spills out or something else, he's in trouble. But the Kappas are they're shapeshifters. They can change into anything. Again, this is all Japanese lore.
Right, right.
They can change into anything, but they are all, and they have sort of a strange personality, because sometimes they're very helpful to people and they'll do great things for them, favors. Other times they'll just murder them and eat them. so you got your choice if you meet one. He may give you a favor or he may eat you. You don't know.
Right.
So, but those are just some names. I mean, that's what I found. In Eastern Europe, there was females called Rusalka, and these are basically they're young women that had committed suicide. So first thing is they have to be suicide, and it may be like, maybe they had an unwanted pregnancy, or it's always some kind of a love story, unwanted pregnancy, or a boyfriend left them, or something like that, and so they commit suicide. And once they do that, again, it's this kind of suicide thing being a curse.
Right.
They're called Rusalka, and for the most part, they're in water and they'll stay in water. But in the spring, they come out and they'll be in the woods and along the rivers and stuff, and they sing and they entice young men and kill them. so there you go. So anyway, a long story short, I mean, this was the thing, Charlotte. As I was doing the book, I was finding, hundreds of these kinds of shapeshifters, and so yes, different names. Yeah, I mean, just for werewolves alone, there's probably 50 or 60 names that I came up with, around the world. So,
were you able to find anybody to talk to about these things, or were people kind of closed mouth about it?
No, I think there were people that would talk about it. I used a lot of primary sources. First, do some research. Like one of the books I used was written in the 17th century, and it was written by a monk who, I don't know who gave him the order, but he was charged with going around France, particularly, and investigating stories of ghosts, werewolves, vampires, anything weird. And he went and investigated, so he would talk to people. He would get records of, trial records if there was a court hearing for somebody accused of witchcraft or accused of being a vampire or something. So that was an important source. So I used a lot of those early sources like that, original sources. But then as I was doing research and traveling around the country, I was talking to people who had stories that, oh yeah, my grandmother used to tell me about whatever. But I also talked to some people who were scholars, academics who had done some work. Like in Portugal, I talked to a woman, a professor who had written many books and papers about muras encantadas, which were women who were shapeshifters and usually would shapeshift into the form of a snake. And this was in Portuguese legend and everything. So yeah, I mean, it was not hard to find people to talk to. In France, there's a museum for the beast of Gévaudan, which was this werewolf kind of creature that ravaged southern France for about 3 years and killed like over 100 people. And there's a museum dedicated to that, so you can talk to the people that run the museum and everything else. So yeah, it was easy to get stories and stuff.
How long did it take you to do the research?
Well, the preliminary research before traveling was probably close to a year, just reading all these books and texts and finding that kind of stuff. Then the travel itself was maybe about 3 months through mostly Europe and talking to people. So what, maybe a year and a half total, something like that, to do the research.
Now, like in the United States, like you say, depending where you go, people see different things. What do you think is the most frequent shapeshifter seen in the U.S.?
I don't know. I mean, some people talk about, Sasquatch. or Bigfoot, however you want to call about it. Some people think that that's a shapeshifter.
Okay.
I don't know why they do think that, because every story that I've ever heard about the creature seems to me that it's I think it's a cryptid. I think it's just some kind of a animal that we have overlooked, has been hidden from us for all these years. But some people do think that. But I think we're also hearing stuff about dogmen. Have you heard about that?
No, let's hear about the dogman.
Yeah, and it seems to be, again, kind of in the Midwest, the upper Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those areas primarily. But talking about people that have a human form,
Mm-hmm.
except that they have a dog head, and it sounds really funny. But there are stories about people saying that I've seen this thing and that they've seen it shift from like a human form to this dog-headed person. And I'm just thinking, it sounds like a strange story, but you can look it up, Dogman. You'll find stuff. Just go on the internet and you'll
Right,
find it.
right.
I'm thinking, I wonder, if that happens, what do you get your choice of dog? Because like I wouldn't want to have a Chihuahua head, you know. I mean, German Shepherd, Chihuahua. No,
That's funny. That's funny. I interviewed somebody about the Beast of Bray Road
oh
like
yeah.
a couple months back, and when you were
Hmm.
talking about the dogman, that kind of brought that up. As far as seeing stuff, and I can kind of understand why people might think Sasquatch is a shapeshifter because it's kind of like a now you see it, now you don't. People see it,
Yeah,
and then it will disappear right in front of them, or it seems to disappear because I mean the woods is the woods, right? So
yeah,
maybe that's why people are thinking that.
yeah. It's true. I mean, it could be, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, you also have, it's not just America, but you have a fair number of people around the world that
Hmm.
believe that there are reptilian alien shapeshifters
Hmm.
among us, and this whole theory, well, I don't want to call it a theory.
Right.
That gives a little bit too much credence. This whole idea was started by a guy in England, David Icke, who has this whole story for it where he believes that millions of years ago some alien race came from some star nearby, came to Earth, and
Hmm.
that they mated with whatever kind of sort of proto humans were running around at the time, Neanderthals, or I don't know, whatever they would have been, maybe even something not that developed, but that genetic strain has been passed down to some people through millions and millions of years. So
Right.
the theory is there are some people that can shapeshift into reptiles.
Hmm. Hmm.
And his idea is that some of the world's leaders are reptilian alien shapeshifters, including the late Queen Elizabeth II, Barack Obama, and other celebrities like musicians and athletes and things like this. That some of them are shapeshifters. So, but there's an amazing number of people that believe this. So that may be a very common shapeshifter, not just here, but
Right.
worldwide.
Right. 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 What do you think is the common thread in all this?
For me, I it's an interesting question because I was interested in sort of the psychology behind it all. You
Hmm.
know, like why is the shapeshifter character so common? Why
Hmm.
is it such a favorite in every culture? And what I think, I'm not a psychologist or anything else, but I think that the shapeshifter calls to us in some ways because it allows us, I think, vicariously to be something other than what we are, right?
Hmm.
So if you have some shortcoming, or you think you do, you think, hey, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm not handsome enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not whatever.
Hmm.
uh, and so many of us have some insecurity about something, right? The shapeshifter allows you to become something different, something. And usually think of like a lot of the superheroes,
Hmm.
like the Marvel and DC universe of superheroes.
Right.
So many of them are everyday, ordinary people, right? Superman is Clark Kent, mild-mannered reporter Clark Kent, right? But then what happens? He shapeshifts. He literally, he becomes something else, right? And that's common superhero. So that to me is an indication that if there's something sort of lacking, that the idea of a shapeshifter can, sort of set that off for you. You can be something other than you are. And we all do this. We all shapeshift, and I'll put that in quotes. We sort of shapeshift internally, right? Um, if I have to give this, okay, this is an example here, but it's not even as much as if I have to give an audience an in-person talk to 200 people in a concert hall in London,
Mm-hmm.
which I've done. When I go out there on the stage, I become something else. I put on a different hat, which in a sense is shapeshifting. I'm more of an actor. I'm more of a, whatever, which is not how I am at home.
Mm-hmm.
So we all do this. There's different situations where we know we have to act differently. We have to be something different for whatever reason. That's kind of shapeshifting. Halloween. Everybody
Right.
dresses up for Halloween, right? Why? You ask yourself, why do you pick that particular costume, whatever it is? What's that say about you?
Right.
Right? If you dress up as Superman all the time, to me it says you want to be Superman. He's your hero, man. You want to be Superman. Well, that means you want to be strong and you want to have X-ray vision and you want to be able to fly, right? Um, if you dress up as an apple, you got some other issues. I don't know what they are, but you know. So, so I think it's the whole thing about shapeshifter, and I also think that um, not only do they sort of, and so in that way, a shapeshifter is a positive influence because if it gets you to step out of who you are to make yourself better, to literally force yourself to change to be a better person,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's only temporary, that's a good thing, right? At the same time, the converse is true, where shapeshifters could be a good excuse for bad behavior. You think of um, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the
Mm-hmm.
novel. I mean, here you had a guy who was a doctor, a medical doctor, well respected in his community, upstanding, honest, straight arrow guy. Yet there was something in him that said, I'd like to take a walk on the dark side. What would it be like if I didn't have to be this respectable guy? If I could take my
Right.
time off and just howl at the moon. And he does that to a bad effect. He ends up killing himself, because he actually kills somebody as Mr. Hyde. So, shape shifting could do that too. It can be an excuse for bad behavior, the
Mm-hmm.
animal nature in us. And again, I talked before about animal and human nature in all of us. So it's a mixed bag. But I think that is really part of why it's such an attractive character and why it's still around and why it says something to us, because we can experience what the shapeshifter experiences vicariously. You
Mm-hmm.
could read a novel about a shapeshifter. You can watch a movie about a shapeshifter. You dress up as Halloween. You can do cosplay, whatever.
Right.
And those are all sort of safe outlets to allow you to experience that, walk on the wild side without getting yourself in jail.
Right. Do you think, again, like you say, you see him in movies, you see him in popular culture. Do you think that these legends are, at some point in our future, are going to disappear, or do you think they're going to keep going?
No, I think the shapeshifter character is going to be with us because as I said, I think it's sort of part of who we are. I think it's part of our dual nature. Um, the fact that we have a dual nature means that we can shift from time to time. You can get into a terrible rage and be like an animal. And somebody says, "Oh, well, calm down, calm down." Okay, and then you do. So I mean, that's our nature, and so I think it'll be there. And it's interesting because even when you see some newer things like some of the Star Trek, which isn't necessarily new
I
anymore.
was just thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but who is it? Odo, right? There's a guy Odo who's a shapeshifter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I saw one show where he they had to get through a door and the door was sealed, and he just basically turned himself into liquid metal or something and slid under the door crack and came back on the other side and opened it up.
Yeah.
So I mean, if we're still doing it with Star Trek and all that, and the shapeshifters are in our culture,
Mm-hmm.
walk especially at Halloween, walk down the cereal aisle and see how many cereals have vampires on them, or see how many candies have vampires or werewolves on the wrapper and and not even at Halloween, just all time.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
TV shows, I have two little granddaughters, and one of them told me about Vampirina, who I'd never heard of. I don't know if you know about it, but
I've heard the name, but I've never seen
yeah,
it.
it's a little cartoon series for little kids. Vampirina is this cute little vampire girl. Her family comes from Transylvania to Pennsylvania. Yeah, and they live a normal life, but they're vampires, but they don't ever eat anybody. They're nice vampires. And they have a ghost and all this stuff. So that's there, and they're shapeshifters. My other granddaughter said, "Well, do you know about Morphle?" And I said, "Okay, what's Morphle?" Another cartoon, and Morphle's like this little round. It's like a red gumball with feet and eyes, and it's apparently a magical pet that you get at the magical pet store. And so a little girl gets Morphle, and that's her pet. And Morphle, Morphl, Morphle, so morphology, the change, metamorphosis, right? Morphle can change into anything that the little girl asks him to change into. So every episode, Morphle becomes a steam shovel, or Morphle becomes a bridge, or Morphle becomes I don't know, ham sandwich. I mean, whatever this little kid needs, Morphle. And okay, so that's shapeshifting. Transformers, that famous toy that so many kids like,
Right.
those are shapeshifters.
Yep.
They're mechanical, but you have a car that turns into a robot, or so
Mm-hmm.
they're not going away.
Yeah.
They've been with us for a long time.
John, it's always a pleasure to have you on. I thank you so much. It was entertaining, and I can't wait for your next book.
I'll let you know.
Let me know. We'll get you back on here.
All
Okay?
right, Charlotte. Thank you.
How can people find you?
Well, best way is my website. JohnKachuba.com is my website. JohnKachuba.com. I got my books on there. If you can't find them in the bookstore or Amazon, you can get them from my website. I have my schedule of appearances on there too, so people know where to look for me. In fact, I'll be in London, Ohio tomorrow night at their library, giving a talk there
Yeah.
about
All right.
shapeshifters.
All right, sir. Well, you have a good evening, okay?
You too. Take care.
And we'll get you back on. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. It's always fun to have him on, and boy, it is an education. Let me get up here. It is an education. I learned stuff about like the Japanese shapeshifters I never heard of before, right? Anyway, tomorrow, just make a mental note of this, guys. Tomorrow the show will be at 11 a.m. Pacific. Okay? I've got a guest coming on, and we're going to be talking about, his name is David Domini. I think I got it right. And he runs tours in haunted old Louisville, Kentucky. That's supposed to be one of the most haunted towns in the United States. So we're going to be talking with him about his experiences giving tours and the ghosts in old Louisville. So that'll be tomorrow, 11 a.m. Pacific. And thank you guys for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a blast talking to him about shapeshifters. Love it. Grew up on that stuff, like I said. Even going to Hungary as a kid, my dad was always all about Dracula, and I always was shocked because my father was Hungarian. I knew Dracula was supposed to be Hungarian, and so it always scared me as a kid. Always. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming. If you're watching from Facebook and you like the show, please hit that follow button. If you're watching from YouTube and you like the show, please hit that subscribe button. We're always looking for subscribers. And if you're watching, if you happen to come across a TikTok, please hit that follow button over at TikTok as well, and the like button. I want to thank you guys for coming tonight, and I'll have John's contact information for you as soon as we finish the roll here. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here. Excuse me. Never drink water before the show. We're equal opportunity here. And if you see that thing flashing down the bottom, that's because we want to keep this show going on the air. We're in our third season. Real excited about that. Numbers are really strong. But the thing is that we don't take any money to do any investigations or anything like that. And so, like everybody else, I have to pay bills. And so I've got internet bills and everything else. And if you could find it in your heart to help me out with some of that stuff, I'd really appreciate it. I really would, because I want to keep this thing going. So you can do that at paypal.me/CaliforniaHaunts. Or if you're uncomfortable with PayPal, Venmo, and then type in California Haunts. Otherwise, I want to shut up now, and I'll show you John's information, and then we're going to get out of here. And I will see you guys at 11 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. Website, johnkachuba.com. And there's the Shapeshifters book for you, Shapeshifters: A History. And there's some more of his books. Ghost Hunting Ohio, Ghost Hunters. He's got several books out, a lot more than what I'm showing here. Ghost Hunting Illinois, Ghost Hunting Ohio, again. The Savage Apostle, Dark Entry. Can't read that one, too small. The other one's Ghost Stories. My old eyes can't read the one. And those books are available via his website or at Amazon.com. All right, guys. Again, I will see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Pacific, so we can talk about old Louisville and the ghosts that roam there. Have a good night.